Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video on the top 5 mistakes people make when praying to God. Before we dive into the main points, let me start with a personal story. I remember a time in my life when I was going through a particularly tough period. I had lost my job, my relationship was struggling, and I felt like everything was falling apart. It was during this time that I turned to prayer, and it completely transformed my life. Through consistent prayer, I found comfort, guidance, and strength. It helped me to stay focused, positive, and hopeful, even in the midst of challenges. And ultimately, it led me to a deeper relationship with God. That's why I believe that prayer is such a powerful tool for all of us. It's a way to connect with God, to seek His guidance and wisdom, and to bring positive change into our lives. But like any other skill, prayer takes practice, and there are certain mistakes that we can make that can hinder its effectiveness. In this video, we'll be exploring the top 5 mistakes people make when praying to God and how to avoid them. We'll look at common pitfalls such as not believing in the power of prayer, being unclear or vague in our requests, not listening for God's response, failing to offer thanks and praise, and giving up too easily. By the end of this video, you'll have a better understanding of how to effectively communicate with God through prayer and how to avoid the mistakes that can limit its impact. So let's get started. Mistake 1: not believing in the power of prayer. Many people struggle with feelings of inadequacy or doubt when it comes to prayer. They may feel like their prayers are not good enough or that God isn't really listening. But the truth is, prayer is not just a way to ask for things. It's also a way to build a relationship with God. When we pray, we're not just listing off a bunch of requests. We're actually communicating with the Creator of the universe. We're sharing our thoughts, feelings, and desires with Him, and He's listening. He wants to have a personal relationship with each and every one of us, and prayer is a key part of that. But how do we know that prayer works? How do we know that God is really listening? Well, let me tell you, there are countless examples throughout history and in religious texts where prayer has made a difference. For example, in the Bible, there's a story about a woman named Hannah who was barren and couldn't have children. She prayed to God for a child, and eventually she gave birth to a son named Samuel. Samuel grew up to be a great prophet and leader in Israel. Or consider the story of King Jehoshaphat, who was facing a massive army that was threatening to destroy his kingdom. He prayed to God for help, and God sent a spirit of fear upon the enemy army, causing them to turn against each other and flee. These are just a couple of examples, but there are many more stories like this throughout religious history. And it's not just in religious texts either. Many people have experienced the power of prayer in their own lives. Personally, I can attest to the power of prayer. There have been countless times when I've felt lost or uncertain, and I've turned to prayer for guidance and comfort. And every time I felt a sense of peace and clarity that I couldn't explain. It's like God has been right there with me, guiding me and supporting me every step of the way. So if you're someone who struggles with doubts about prayer, I encourage you to try it out for yourself. Don't just ask for things, but also listen for God's response. Build a relationship with Him and trust that He's always working for your good. Mistake 2: being unclear or vague in your prayers. You know, sometimes we can get caught up in the habit of praying for generic things like happiness or success. We might say something like, "Dear God, please make me happy," or "Dear God, please help me succeed." But the problem is, these phrases are pretty vague. What does happy really mean? What does success look like? It's important to be specific and clear in your prayers because it helps God understand exactly what you're asking for. Think about it like this. If you were to ask your best friend for a favor, would you just say, "Hey, can you do something for me?" No, you'd probably give them some details like, "Hey, can you pick up some milk on your way home from work?" That way, your friend knows exactly what you need. Similarly, when we pray, we should strive to be specific and clear about what we're asking for. Instead of saying, "Dear God, please make me successful," we could say, "Dear God, please help me land that promotion at work that I've been working towards." Or instead of saying, "Dear God, please make me happy," we could say, "Dear God, please help me find joy in my relationships and in the work that I do." By being specific and clear in our prayers, we're showing God that we trust Him to provide us with exactly what we need. And when we trust God, we open ourselves up to receive His blessings in ways that we never thought possible. So let's take a moment to reflect on our own prayers. Are we guilty of being vague or unclear? Let's try to rephrase some of our prayers to be more specific and clear. For example, instead of saying, "Dear God, please help me with my finances," we could say, "Dear God, please help me pay off my credit card debt within the next 6 months." By doing this, we're giving God a clear idea of what we need, and we're demonstrating our trust in Him to provide for us. Mistake 3, not listening for God's response. You know, a lot of us tend to treat prayer like a one-way conversation. We do all the talking, and we don't leave much room for God to respond. We might say something like, "Dear God, please help me with this problem," and then we just wait for a solution to magically appear. But prayer is supposed to be a two-way conversation. We're not just supposed to talk to God, we're also supposed to listen for His response. The thing is, God doesn't always speak to us in the same way that we speak to each other. Sometimes His responses come in unexpected ways. Maybe we'll read a verse in the Bible that suddenly seems relevant to our situation, or maybe we'll have a dream that gives us insight into what we should do, or maybe we'll just have a sudden sense of peace or clarity that we can't explain. These are all ways that God can speak to us, and we need to be open to hearing His voice. I can remember a time when I was struggling with a difficult decision. I had been praying about it for weeks, but I still didn't feel like I had a clear answer. Then one day I was reading my Bible and came across a verse that jumped out at me. It said, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." Suddenly, it clicked for me. I realized that I didn't need to figure everything out on my own. I just needed to trust that God had a plan. Other people have had similar experiences. Someone might have a dream that shows them the path forward. Another person might have an intuition that tells them what they should do. These are all ways that God can speak to us, and we need to be open to hearing His voice. So how can we avoid making this mistake? First, we need to recognize that prayer is a two-way conversation. We need to leave space for God to respond, and we need to be willing to listen for His voice. Second, we need to be open to the different ways that God can speak to us. Maybe we won't hear an audible voice, but we might see a sign or have a feeling that we can't ignore. Finally, we need to trust that God has a plan for us, even when we don't understand what it is. Mistake 4, failing to offer thanks and praise. You know, a lot of us tend to focus solely on asking for things in our prayers. We might say something like, "Dear God, please help me with this problem," or "Dear God, please give me this thing that I want." But we often forget to take time to offer thanks and praise to God for what He's already done in our lives. It's important to show gratitude and appreciation for what God has given us. When we do, we're acknowledging that everything we have is a gift from Him, and we're expressing our thankfulness for His love and provision. Plus, when we offer thanks and praise, we're opening ourselves up to receive even more blessings from God. Let me give you an example. Imagine you go to a restaurant and order a delicious meal. The food is amazing, and you're grateful for the chef's hard work. You might say something like, "Thank you so much for this incredible meal. It was absolutely delicious." Now imagine that the chef hears your compliment and says, "Well, thank you, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Here, let me give you another plate of food on the house. That's kind of like what happens when we offer thanks and praise to God. He blesses us even more abundantly. So, how can we incorporate thanks and praise into our prayers? One way is to start our prayers by thanking God for what He's already done. We might say something like, "Lord, thank you for all the blessings in my life. Thank you for my family, my friends, and my health." Another way is to include praise in our prayers. We might say something like, "God, you are so good and faithful. Your love endures forever, and your grace is beyond measure." Remember, prayer is not just about asking for things. It's also about building a relationship with God and expressing our gratitude for all that He's done for us. So let's make sure to offer thanks and praise in our prayers, and watch how God pours out His blessings on us even more abundantly. Mistake 5, giving up too easily. You know, a lot of us have been there. We pray for something, but it doesn't happen right away. Maybe we pray for a job, but we don't get it. Maybe we pray for healing, but we still feel sick. And so we start to think that prayer doesn't work, or that God must not care about us. But the truth is, prayer requires perseverance and faith. We need to remember that God's timing is not always the same as ours. Just because we don't see immediate results doesn't mean that God isn't working on our behalf. In fact, sometimes the things that we pray for the most fervently are the very things that require the most patience and perseverance. Take, for example, the story of Abraham and Sarah in the Bible. They prayed for a child for years, but year after year passed and they remained childless. But they kept praying, and finally, when they were both well past retirement age, God granted them a son. Their perseverance in prayer paid off, and they received the blessing they had been seeking for so long. In my own life, I've seen the power of persistent prayer. A few years ago, I was struggling with anxiety and depression. I prayed every day for healing and peace, but it seemed like things only got worse. But I refused to give up. I kept praying, and slowly but surely I began to feel better. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but God did answer my prayers in His own way and in His own time. So how can we avoid making this mistake? First, we need to remember that prayer is not a magic formula that guarantees instant results. It's a process of building a relationship with God, and that takes time and effort. Second, we need to cultivate a mindset of perseverance and faith. We need to trust that God is working on our behalf, even when we don't see immediate answers to our prayers. And third, we need to keep praying, no matter what. Even when things seem impossible, we need to hold on to hope and keep bringing our prayers before God. Persistent prayer pays off, my friends. Keep praying and trust that God will come through for you in His own way and in His own time. Conclusion. So there you have it. The top 5 mistakes people make when praying to God and how to avoid them. By learning from these common pitfalls, you can take your prayer life to the next level and deepen your connection with God. Remember, prayer is a powerful tool that can bring peace, comfort, and guidance into your life. But it's important to use it correctly, and that's where these tips come in. First, don't make assumptions about God's role in your life. Instead, seek a deeper understanding of His character and ways. Second, don't limit your prayers to material requests. Ask for spiritual growth and guidance, and trust that God will provide what you need. Third, don't neglect to listen for God's response. Take time to quiet your mind and listen for His still, small voice. Fourth, don't give up when things get tough. Persistence in prayer is key, even when the answers don't come easily. And fifth, don't forget to offer thanks and praise. Expressing gratitude and admiration for God's goodness and majesty is an essential part of any healthy prayer life. By following these simple principles, you can transform your prayer life and experience a closer, more intimate relationship with God. So why not take the challenge and start implementing these strategies today? Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever made any of these mistakes in your prayer life? How have you learned to overcome them? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, and let's continue the conversation. And if you found this video helpful, please consider sharing it with a friend or loved one who may benefit from these insights. Together we can grow in our faith and deepen our connection with God. Thanks for watching, and until next time, may God richly bless you.